If you're going to keep acting like this, then maybe it's time you leave. Those were the words my son Daniel said to me while standing in the middle of the living room I had paid for with 40 years of work. I remember staring at him, trying to understand how the same little boy who once cried when I left him at kindergarten could now look at me like I was some unwanted stranger. Outside, rain hit the windows in angry waves. Inside, the silence hurt even more. My daughter in law, Vanessa, stood beside him with her arms crossed tightly over her expensive cream colored sweater. She didn't say a word at first. She didn't need to. The satisfaction in her eyes said everything. I slowly put down my teacup onto the coffee table, the same table I bought when Daniel graduated college. What exactly am I doing wrong? I asked quietly. Daniel rubbed his forehead impatiently. Mom, this isn't working anymore. Not working. Funny how children turn love into inconvenience once they no longer need you. Vanessa finally spoke. We need space, Eleanor. Space. That word people use when they're trying to remove you from their lives without sounding cruel. I looked around the house, the chandelier above us, the hardwood floors, the fireplace, the family portraits. Every inch of that house carried my fingerprints. I had cleaned those floors on my knees after working double shifts at the hospital. I had skipped vacations for 23 years to pay the mortgage. After my husband Frank died, I worked nights while raising Daniel alone. And now my own son stood in front of me, treating me like a burden. Daniel sighed. Mom, maybe assisted living would be better for you. The words hit me like ice water. Assisted living? Vanessa quickly jumped in. It's actually very nice. There are activities, nurses, people your age. People my age. As if old people were supposed to disappear together somewhere out of sight. I looked at my son carefully. You want to send me away? No one is sending you away, he snapped. Then why are you asking me to leave my own home? The second the words left my mouth, Vanessa's fax repression changed for a split second. Tiny, almost invisible, but I noticed. Fear. Daniel looked away. That's not what this is about. Oh? I asked softly. Then tell me exactly what this is about. Neither of them answered, and that silence told me everything. You see, what Daniel didn't know was that the house legally belonged to me. Not him, not both of us, me. But 3 years earlier, after his business failed, I allowed him and Vanessa to move in temporarily. Temporary eventually became permanent. Then slowly, almost without noticing, I became the guest. First, Vanessa redecorated the kitchen without asking me. Then my bedroom was moved upstairs because the master suite was better for the children. Then I stopped being included in family dinners. Eventually, I was no longer Eleanor. I became, can you watch the kids? Can you fold laundry? Can you cook tonight? I became free labor inside my own home. And worst of all, I allowed it. Because mothers are experts at convincing themselves mistreatment is love. Daniel suddenly raised his voice. We can't keep doing this. I blinked slowly. Doing what? Existing? Vanessa stepped closer. The truth is, the kids are uncomfortable around negativity. Negativity? I almost laughed. I had spent the last year silently enduring insults just to avoid conflict. But now suddenly I was the problem. Daniel pointed toward the stairs. If you don't want assisted living, then maybe you should pack your things and go somewhere else. There it was, the moment a mother realizes she raised someone she no longer recognizes. My chest tightened painfully, but I refused to cry. Not in front of them. Never in front of them. Instead, I smiled. A calm smile. The kind that frightens people more than screaming ever could. "All right," I said softly. "I'll pack." Daniel froze. Vanessa's eyes widened slightly. They had expected tears, begging, resistance, not peace. I walked upstairs slowly to the small guest room they had moved me into 8 months earlier. The room barely fit a bed and dresser. My old master bedroom downstairs had become Vanessa's yoga room. I opened the closet and pulled out my old brown suitcase. The same suitcase Frank and I used during our honeymoon 48 years ago. Carefully, I folded my clothes, one sweater at a time, one memory at a time. Then I opened the nightstand drawer and removed a small metal box filled with photographs. Frank smiling beside our first car. Daniel at age 6 holding a baseball glove. Our first Christmas inside that house. I touched the pictures gently, not because I was weak, but because grief has weight, and some memories feel heavier than furniture. Downstairs, I could hear Vanessa whispering excitedly, probably already discussing how they'd use my room. An hour later, I carried my suitcase downstairs. Daniel stood near the front door, pretending not to look guilty. Vanessa sat scrolling through her phone. Then the doorbell rang. Daniel opened it casually, and everything changed. A black Mercedes sedan sat outside the house. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped out holding an umbrella. The moment Daniel saw him, confusion spread across his face. "Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore?" the man asked respectfully. "Yes. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Harrison Clark." Vanessa frowned. "Harrison Clark?" The man nodded. "The owner of Clark Development." Daniel's face went pale. Everyone in the city knew that name. Billionaire real estate developer, hotels, commercial towers, luxury properties. The man handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a single letter. "Eleanor, I heard what happened. You should never have been treated this way. The house matter must be addressed immediately. I've arranged accommodations for you until we speak tonight. Your old friend, Harrison." Daniel stared at me. "You know Harrison Clark?" I looked directly into my son's eyes for the first time all evening. "Yes," I said quietly. "Very well." Vanessa suddenly stood up. "Wait, what does he mean by the house matter?" I picked up my suitcase calmly. "That," I said, "is something you're both about to learn." And for the first time since my husband died, I walked out of that house feeling something dangerous rising inside me. Not sadness, not fear, power. The ride to Harrison Clark's building felt unreal. I sat in the back of that black Mercedes with my suitcase beside me, staring out the window as my own son stood frozen on the porch behind us. The house grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared behind the rain. And still, I could not make myself feel shocked by what had just happened. I felt something else instead, a strange calm, the kind that comes after a person finally says the thing they've been swallowing for too long. Harrison sat across from me, quiet and respectful, as if he understood that I was not ready for questions yet. But I had questions, too many of them. "Why did you come?" I asked at last, my voice low. He looked down for a moment, then back at me. Because your husband asked me to look after you if anything ever happened to him, he said. And because I knew your son had forgotten who you are. That sentence settled in my chest. Forgotten who I am. That was the truth of it, wasn't it? Not that Daniel had stopped loving me in some dramatic, sudden way. No, it was worse than that. He had grown comfortable forgetting me, comfortable taking from me, comfortable speaking to me as if I were temporary, replaceable, already fading from the room. The car passed the riverfront and turned into the polished downtown district, where glass towers caught the lights and made the city glow like something out of a dream. I had not been in this part of town for months, maybe longer. At 70, I had spent enough years being told to slow down, to stay home, to leave the decisions to other people. Yet here I was, riding through the city in a limousine while the son I raised watched me leave like he had won something. When we reached Harrison's building, two security guards opened the doors before we even stepped out. The lobby smelled like wood polish and fresh flowers. Marble floors stretched beneath crystal lights, and everything about the place looked expensive, quiet, and untouchable. Untouchable. That was the word that came to mind. I was escorted to an elevator, and as the doors closed, my reflection stared back at me from the mirrored wall. Gray hair pinned neatly back, wet eyes, a face older than I remembered, but not broken. Not yet. Harrison watched me in the reflection. Your room is ready, he said, but before you rest, there's something you need to see. I turned to him. What kind of something? He reached into his coat and removed another envelope. This one was thicker. He did not hand it to me right away. He only held it between us for a moment, as if giving me time to understand that what was inside would change the shape of my life. Your husband made arrangements years ago, he said, when he began to see how Daniel was handling things. He asked me to keep copies of certain records. My heart beat harder, but I stayed still. What records? Property documents, deeds, financial statements. The kind of things sons don't usually think to ask about when they believe everything already belongs to them. The elevator doors opened onto a private floor. He led me down a quiet hallway and into a penthouse apartment so large it seemed to breathe around me. There were tall windows, warm lighting, heavy curtains, and views of the city that stretched all the way to the river. It was beautiful, but I barely noticed any of that, because my mind had already gone to the envelope. Harrison set my suitcase down near the sofa. Sit, he said gently. Please. I sat. He opened the envelope and spread the papers on the glass coffee table in front of me. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning line after line of legal print I did not yet fully understand. Then I saw it. My name, Eleanor Whitmore, owner. I blinked twice and looked up at him. What exactly am I looking at? Harrison's expression softened. You're looking at the title deed to the house your son just kicked you out of. For a moment, I could not speak. The room seemed to tilt around me, not because I was dizzy, but because the truth had landed in such an impossible way that my mind needed a second to catch up. He doesn't own that house, Harrison continued. Not legally, not fully. Your husband made sure of that before he died. The property was placed in your name because he did not trust Daniel to handle it responsibly. I stared at the paper, then at the signature, then back at the paper again. Frank had known. Of course he had known. He had always been the cautious one, the quiet one, the man who never trusted appearances. I could hear his voice in my head now, calm as ever. Keep your name on the house, Ellie. Keep one thing safe. I had thought he was being overly careful. I had thought he was worrying too much. But he had seen the future clearly enough to protect me from it. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Daniel said the house was his. Harrison gave a small, bitter smile. Daniel has been saying many things for a long time. I looked back at the deed, my pulse steady now, but my thoughts racing. All those years of living there, all those months of being reduced to a shadow, all those insults hidden inside polite words, all those times Vanessa said the house was cramped, the house was dated, the house would look better with a newer kitchen or a different layout. They had never been talking about improving my home. They had been talking about preparing to take it. And I had let them believe I was too old to notice. Harrison took the papers and placed one final document on top. This is the current proof of ownership, he said. And this is what will matter when your son realizes his mistake. What mistake? I asked quietly. He looked me in the eye. That he does not get to throw you out of the house your husband bought for you. That he does not get to rewrite your life just because you are older. And that he certainly does not get to humiliate you while standing on ground that belongs to you. I leaned back in the chair slowly. The truth was not exploding all at once. It was settling into place piece by piece, like a staircase under my feet. Heavy, solid, real. I thought of Daniel standing in the doorway, his voice sharp, his eyes cold, his hand pointed toward the stairs as if I were some inconvenience waiting to be removed. I thought of Vanessa's little smile, the one she tried to hide. I thought of how sure they had been, how certain they were that I had nowhere to go. And now I knew something they did not. I had never needed to beg for a place there. I already had one. My house. My name on the deed. My husband's final protection. A slow breath left my chest, almost like the body finally releasing something it had been holding for years. Harrison watched me carefully. I assume you'll want to rest before we discuss the next step. I shook my head. No, I said. I want to know everything. He nodded once, as if expecting that answer. Then tomorrow morning, he replied, you'll meet the attorney who helped your husband prepare the property transfer. And after that, we'll decide how to handle your son. My son. The words felt different now, less tender, more complicated. I looked out through the giant windows toward the city lights and tried to make sense of the strange shape my life had taken in just 1 hour. I had left one house with a suitcase and entered another with a truth my son could not imagine. For the first time in years, I was not sitting at the mercy of other people's opinions. I was standing on facts, and facts had a way of changing everything. That night, I slept in a bed larger and softer than the one I had left behind, but sleep did not come easily. I kept seeing the porch, Daniel's face, Vanessa's silence, the limousine waiting in the rain. And beneath it all, the same thought kept returning. He threw me out. He really believed I had nowhere to go. He had no idea that the house he had tried to take from me was still mine. And now, because of that, he was about to learn what kind of woman he had raised. One who could sew a wedding dress with tired hands for 32 years. One who could work through grief and debt and loneliness and still keep a secret safe. One who could be pushed out of a room and still come back stronger. One who owned the house he thought he had won. And by the time he found out, it would already be too late. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the tall windows, the city skyline, the soft gray light pouring across the room. And suddenly, everything came rushing back. Daniel threw me out. Vanessa standing there with that cold little smile. The deed, the truth. I sat up slowly and pressed my hand against my chest. At 70 years old, I thought I had already experienced every kind of heartbreak a woman could survive. Losing my husband, working through grief, watching friends disappear one funeral at a time. But nothing prepares a mother for the moment her child looks at her like she no longer belongs. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," I said. Harrison entered carrying a silver tray with coffee, toast, and fresh fruit. Even after all these years, he still moved with the same calm confidence Frank used to admire. "You should eat something," he said gently. "I'm not hungry." "That's never stopped you before." I almost smiled. He sat across from me while I wrapped my hands around the warm coffee cup. "I spoke with the attorney this morning," he said. "He's expecting us at 10. I nodded slowly. Then I asked the question that had been haunting me all night. Why didn't Frank ever tell me the house was fully protected under my name? Harrison leaned back slightly. "Because he knew you would eventually hand it over to Daniel." The answer hurt because it was true. Frank knew me too well. He knew that if Daniel had ever cried, apologized, or claimed he needed help, I would have signed anything placed in front of me. That's what mothers do when love blinds them. We destroy our own boundaries and call it sacrifice. Harrison continued carefully. Toward the end of his life, Frank became concerned about Daniel's spending habits. He saw the debts, the impulsive decisions, the constant need to impress people. I looked down into my coffee silently. "He told me once," Harrison said quietly, "that Daniel wanted the appearance of success more than the discipline required to build it." That sounded painfully accurate. After Frank died, Daniel changed quickly. At first, it was small things: designer suits, luxury dinners, business ventures that sounded important but somehow never made money. Then came Vanessa, beautiful, charming, always perfectly dressed. The kind of woman who knew exactly how to smile while calculating the value of everything around her. At first, I welcomed her warmly. I even remember telling my friends how lucky Daniel was. What a fool I had been. The attorney's office sat inside a tall stone building downtown. The receptionist greeted Harrison immediately, clearly recognizing him, then escorted us into a private conference room lined with shelves of legal books. An older man stood when we entered. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said warmly. "I'm Richard Bennett. Your husband trusted me with several matters before his passing." He motioned for me to sit. Then he placed a thick folder in front of me. Inside were documents, property records, and copies of old financial agreements I had never seen before. Richard adjusted his glasses. "Your husband structured ownership of the house very carefully. Legally, the property belongs entirely to you. Your son has no ownership rights whatsoever." Hearing it spoken aloud made something shift inside me. Not emotionally, legally, officially. I was not helpless. I was not dependent. And I was certainly not disposable. Richard opened another folder. "There's more." My stomach tightened. Over the last 3 years, Daniel attempted twice to transfer partial ownership into his own name. I stared at him. "What?" Richard nodded grimly. He submitted preliminary paperwork both times, but because your signature was required, the transfer could not proceed. Harrison's expression darkened beside me. He never told her any of this. No, Richard said. He claimed Mrs. Whitmore was too overwhelmed emotionally after losing her husband and preferred he handle everything. I suddenly felt cold, not because of the room, because memory was beginning to rearrange itself. All those moments Daniel insisted paperwork was just routine. All those times Vanessa rushed me through documents during dinner. On all those occasions, they told me not to worry about finances. They had been trying to take the house long before last night. Richard slid another paper toward me. This is particularly important, he said. I looked down. It was a refinancing application. My house had been listed as collateral, signed by Daniel. My heartbeat slowed dangerously. When was this? 8 months ago. I looked up sharply. That's when Vanessa remodeled the kitchen. Richard nodded once. The bank rejected the application after discovering Daniel was not the legal owner. Harrison muttered something under his breath that I could barely hear. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then I asked the question that mattered most. So, legally, what happens now? Richard folded his hands carefully. You have every legal right to reclaim immediate possession of the property. The words echoed in my mind. Reclaim possession. As if I were finally being handed permission to stop apologizing for existing. But, Richard continued, there is one complication. Of course there was. Daniel and Vanessa established residency. Removing them will require formal legal action unless they leave voluntarily. Voluntarily. I almost laughed. Vanessa would sooner set the house on fire than walk away peacefully. Richard continued. There's another issue you should prepare yourself for. He opened a final file. Photographs, receipts, statements. I frowned. What is this? Evidence of financial misuse connected to the property. My chest tightened. What kind of misuse? Richard looked genuinely uncomfortable now. Mrs. Whitmore, your son has accumulated nearly $400,000 in debt. I felt the air leave my lungs. What? Harrison's jaw tightened. Richard pushed forward several documents. Luxury vehicle loans, failed business investments, credit accounts, personal lines of credit. Page after page, numbers, red balances, past due notices. My son wasn't living comfortably. He was drowning. And suddenly everything made sense. The pressure, the sudden hostility, the push to remove me. They weren't trying to gain space. They were trying to gain ownership. Vanessa wanted the house because they were desperate. Daniel had not thrown me out because I was old. He threw me out because he needed what belonged to me. I closed my eyes slowly, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt anger. Not sadness, not grief. Anger. Because I had worked 40 years for that home. 40 years of night shifts, double shifts, Christmas mornings spent in hospitals, birthdays missed, vacations skipped, and my son had tried to gamble it away. Richard spoke gently. There is one more thing you should know. I looked at him. Yesterday evening, shortly after you left the house, Daniel contacted 2 real estate agents. Harrison frowned. What for? Richard answered quietly. He asked how quickly the property could be listed for sale. The room fell silent. I stared at the documents in front of me while something cold settled deep inside my chest. He wasted no time, not even one night. One single hour after throwing me out, he was already planning to sell my home. My fingers curled slowly into fists. Harrison leaned toward me carefully. Eleanor. But I interrupted him. No. My voice came out calm. Too calm. I understand now. And I did. This was never about family. Never about space. Never about assisted living. It was about money. Vanessa saw the house as profit. Daniel saw it as a rescue from debt. And me? I was simply the final obstacle standing in their way. Richard slid one final paper toward me, an emergency legal injunction. With your signature, he said, we can freeze any attempted sale immediately. I picked up the pen without hesitation. This time my hand did not shake. I signed my name slowly and clearly. Eleanor Whitmore, owner, not a burden, not a guest, not an inconvenience. Owner. The moment the pen left the paper, Harrison smiled slightly. There she is, he said softly. I looked at him. What do you mean? The woman Frank always said could survive anything. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to breathe fully. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because when Daniel discovered the house was never his, the real war inside our family would finally begin. 3 days passed before Daniel finally called me. Not once, not twice, 37 times. I ignored every call. Then came the messages. Mom, please answer. There's been a misunderstanding. We need to talk. Vanessa is upset. The realtor says there's some issue with the deed. That last message almost made me laugh. Some issues with the deed. Yes, Daniel. The issue is that the house belongs to your mother. By the 4th day, his tone changed. Mom, if this is about money, we can work something out. Please stop this before it gets worse. Before it gets worse. The irony of that sentence nearly took my breath away. He still believed he was the one losing control. He had no idea what was coming. That afternoon, Harrison walked into the sitting room carrying another folder. You should see this, he said. I looked up from my tea. What now? He sat beside me and handed me several printed photographs. At first, I did not understand what I was seeing. Then my stomach tightened. Moving trucks, workers, furniture being carried out of my house. My house. What is this? I whispered. Happened this morning, Harrison replied quietly. Daniel hired contractors. I stared at the photos harder. The dining room table Frank built by hand. My antique china cabinet. The piano. Everything was being removed, like my life was being erased room by room. He's staging the house, Harrison said coldly, trying to increase resale value before the injunction fully processes through the county system. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then something inside me hardened, not cracked, hardened. I set the photographs down carefully. I want to go there. Harrison studied my face. Eleanor, I said I want to go there. An hour later, the black Mercedes stopped in front of the house. The same house where I brought Daniel home from the hospital. The same porch where Frankie had him remembered it out to me every New Year's Eve. The same kitchen where I spent decades cooking birthday dinners. Only now it looked different. Strange. Unfamiliar. Like a place trying to forget me. Workers carried boxes through the front door while Vanessa stood outside, directing them with sunglasses perched on her head like she owned the world. The moment she saw me step out of the car, her face changed completely. Shock first, then a panic, then anger. Well, she snapped. Look who decided to come back. I ignored her completely and walked toward the house. A young worker blocked the doorway awkwardly. Ma'am, we're under instruction not to let anyone inside. Before I could answer, Harrison stepped forward calmly. You're currently standing on private property owned by Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore. The worker immediately moved aside. Vanessa laughed sharply. Oh, please. Daniel handles everything here. No, I said quietly. He doesn't. She frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I reached into my handbag and pulled out a copy of the deed. Then I handed it to her. The second she read the first page, all color disappeared from her face. Her lips parted slowly. This isn't possible. Oh, it's very possible, Harrison said coldly. Vanessa looked up at me with genuine fear now. You put the house under your name? I stared at her calmly. No, my husband did, decades ago. For the first time since I met her, Vanessa looked small, tiny even, like someone realizing the game she thought she had won never belonged to her. At that exact moment, Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. He jumped out before the engine fully stopped. Mom! He hurried toward us, looking exhausted and disheveled. Dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled clothes, panic all over his face. I barely recognized him. Mom, why are lawyers contacting the realtor? He demanded breathlessly. Why is the sale frozen? I looked at him quietly. What sale? His expression tightened. You know exactly what sale. No, I said softly. I'd like to hear you explain it. Daniel glanced nervously at Vanessa, then back at me. We were just exploring options. Using a house that doesn't belong to you? Silence. Heavy silence. Vanessa suddenly stepped forward. Daniel has lived here for years. He has rights. I turned to her slowly. You moved into my home 3 years ago after your husband failed his second business. Her mouth snapped shut. You lived here rent-free. I paid the taxes. Another step. I paid the insurance. Another. And while I was cooking meals for your children, you were secretly preparing to sell the only thing I had left. Daniel rubbed his face desperately. Mom, please, we can figure this out. No, I said firmly. You already figured it out. He looked at me helplessly. What does that mean? It means you already decided I was disposable. The words hit him harder than yelling ever could. I saw it in his eyes immediately. Guilt. Real guilt. But guilt arrives late in selfish people, usually after consequences. Vanessa folded her arms tightly. You're being dramatic. That sentence. After everything. Dramatic. I slowly turned toward her. Do you know what dramatic is? Her eyes narrowed. Excuse me? Dramatic is working night shifts for 38 years after losing your husband. I stepped closer. Dramatic is eating canned soup so your son can attend college. Another step. Dramatic is watching strangers carry your memories out of your own home because your child thinks you're too old to matter. Vanessa said nothing because there was nothing left to say. Daniel's voice cracked suddenly. I didn't know things would go this far. I looked directly into his eyes. Yes, you did. The wind moved softly through the trees around us. Wookers had stopped moving furniture now. Everyone was watching. Even strangers could sense a family breaking apart. I took a slow breath. Then I spoke the words that changed everything. You have 30 days to leave my house. Daniel stared at me in disbelief. What? You heard me. His face went pale instantly. Mom, please. No, my voice remained calm. Since you were comfortable throwing me out with nowhere to go, I assume you understand how moving works. That's not fair. For the first time, I raised my voice. Fair? The entire driveway fell silent. You want to talk about fair? I pointed toward the front door. I built that home with your father. My voice shook now, but not from weakness. I buried my husband while still paying that mortgage. Another breath. And you stood in that living room and told me to leave like I was trash. Daniel looked like he might collapse. Vanessa stepped forward quickly. You can't just kick us out. I looked at her calmly. I absolutely can. Then Harrison handed Daniel an envelope. What's this? Daniel asked weakly. Official notice, Harrison replied. You've been served. Daniel opened it with trembling hands. I watched his face carefully as realization finally settled in. Court orders, ownership confirmation, immediate cease and desist against sale activity. The fantasy was over. My son finally understood the truth. The house was never his. And suddenly, for the first time in years, I was no longer the powerless one standing in that driveway. He was. The moment Daniel realized the house belonged to me, something inside him cracked. I saw it happen right there in the driveway. His shoulders dropped, his breathing changed. The confidence vanished from his face completely. For the first time in years, my son looked like a frightened little boy again. Vanessa noticed it too, and she hated it. Daniel, she snapped sharply, say something. But he couldn't, because the illusion was gone now. No sale, no profit, no escape. Just debt. Massive debt. And suddenly, the woman who had spent 3 years controlling every room in my house looked terrified. I stood there quietly while rain clouds gathered above us again. Then I noticed something strange. Vanessa wasn't looking at me anymore. She was staring at Harrison, specifically at the envelope still in his hand. Fear flickered across her face again, the same fear I had seen the first night. And in that moment, I realized something important. She wasn't scared of losing the house. She was scared of something else. That evening, after we returned to Harrison's penthouse, I sat silently near the window while the city lights glowed beneath us. My thoughts would not settle. Something about Vanessa's reaction kept bothering me. Harrison noticed immediately. You're thinking too hard again, he said gently. I know that look. I sighed softly. She's hiding something. He leaned back in his chair. What makes you say that? The house wasn't what frightened her today. I looked toward him slowly. It was the paperwork. Harrison went quiet for a moment. Then he stood and walked toward his study. When he returned, he carried another folder, thick, heavy. My stomach tightened instantly. What is that? Something I wasn't sure I should show you yet. That sentence alone told me enough. I set down my tea carefully. Harrison. He handed me the folder slowly. The investigator I hired found additional financial records. I opened the file. Bank statements, wire transfers, hotel receipts. At first, none of it made sense. Then I saw a repeated name, Marcus Reed, over and over again. Payments, reservations, transfers. Who is Marcus Reed? I asked quietly. Harrison's expression darkened. A personal trainer. I frowned. What does that have to do with Vanessa? He hesitated, then finally said it. They've been having an affair. The room went completely silent. I stared at him without speaking. Not because I was shocked Vanessa could betray someone, but because suddenly every strange moment over the last year began making sense. The fake business trips, the unexplained spending, the nights Daniel sat alone downstairs pretending everything was fine. How long? I asked. At least 18 months. I closed the folder slowly. 18 months. All while living under my roof, eating at my table, smiling in family photos. Harrison sat across from me carefully. There's more. Of course there was. There's evidence she used Daniel's accounts to pay for trips with him. I looked back at the papers. Cancun, Miami, Aspen. Luxury hotels. Thousands of dollars. Paid using credit cards connected to Daniel's business accounts. My chest tightened painfully. Not for Vanessa. For my son. Because suddenly I understood something terrible. Daniel wasn't just selfish. He was broken, controlled, manipulated. I remembered all the times Vanessa answered questions for him, corrected him, embarrassed him publicly, decided things without asking. At the time, I thought he was weak. But now I wondered how long he had been emotionally trapped inside that marriage. Harrison leaned forward. There's another reason I needed you to see this. He handed me several printed photographs. Vanessa, a younger man, kissing outside a hotel. My stomach turned. Then came another photo, and another. Then one final image stopped me cold. Vanessa hands the man an envelope of cash. What is that? The investigator traced the payment, Harrison said quietly. $30,000 withdrawn from Daniel's company account. I looked up sharply. She stole from him? Repeatedly. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe properly. All this time, I thought Daniel had become cruel because greed changed him. But now another possibility appeared. What if he had been drowning silently while trying to keep his marriage alive? What if the pressure, the debt, the desperation all led back to Vanessa? That did not excuse what he did to me, not even close. But it changed the shape of the story. And deep down, mothers always notice when their child is suffering, even after betrayal. My phone suddenly rang. Daniel. Again. I stared at the screen for several moments, and finally answered. His voice sounded hollow. Mom. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, Did you really mean it? What? That you're throwing us out. I closed my eyes briefly. He threw me out first. His breathing shook on the other end. I know. Those two words carried more pain than all his apologies combined. I leaned back slowly. Daniel, are you in trouble? Silence. Long silence. Then finally, yes. Not anger, not defensiveness, just honesty. And somehow that hurt worst of all. How bad? Another silence. Then, I owe more money than you know. I looked toward Harrison. He stayed quiet. I tried fixing it, Daniel whispered. Every time things got worse, Vanessa told me one more deal would save us. My chest tightened. And the house? He exhaled shakily. She said selling it would solve everything. There it was, the truth. Not complicated, not dramatic, just greed mixed with desperation. I spoke carefully. Daniel, does she love you? The silence that followed answered before he did. Finally, in a broken voice, he whispered, I don't know anymore. That sentence shattered something inside me. Because no matter how angry a mother becomes, hearing her child sound lost still hurts. I closed my eyes briefly, then asked the question Harrison already knew the answer to. Is there someone else? Daniel stopped breathing for a moment. How did you... He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Tears filled my eyes instantly. Not because Vanessa cheated, because my son sounded humiliated, destroyed, small. I found out 6 months ago, he admitted quietly. She swore it was over. And you believed her? I wanted to. That answer told me everything about the state of his heart. People in pain cling to lies when truth feels unbearable. I stared out at the city lights while grief and anger twisted together inside me. Vanessa had not only tried to take my house, she had poisoned my son from the inside out, used him, manipulated him, spent his money, destroyed his confidence, and somehow still convinced him he deserved it. Daniel's voice cracked again. Mom, I know I hurt you. I said nothing. I know I failed you. Still silent. Then finally, but I swear to you, I never wanted things to become this ugly. A tear slid slowly down my cheek, because for the first time in years, my son sounded sincere. Not polished, not defensive, broken. Harrison watched me quietly from across the room. He already knew what I was struggling with. Justice is easy when strangers hurt you. Family is different. Family leaves wounds that argue with each other. Part of me wanted revenge. Another part wanted to save the little boy who once held my hand crossing the street. Daniel spoke again softly. She's gone tonight. I frowned. What? She left after the lawyers came. His voice turned bitter. She blamed me for everything. I closed my eyes. Cowards always leave first when consequences are arrested. Mom. Yes? I don't know what to do anymore. For a long moment, I said nothing at all. Then, quietly, neither do I. And after we hung up, I sat there staring at the photographs spread across the table, while one terrifying realization settled deep inside my chest. The woman who destroyed my family was not finished yet. Not even close. Because people like Vanessa never leave quietly. And deep down, I knew she was about to do something far worse. 2 mornings later, I woke to the sound of Harrison arguing on the phone. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Harrison almost never raised his voice. But this time was different. This is outrageous, he snapped. You know perfectly well she's lying. I sat up immediately. The bedroom door was slightly open, and I could hear him pacing the hallway outside. No, he said sharply. Do not file anything until we speak to her attorney. My stomach tightened instantly. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I stepped into the hallway. Harrison turned the moment he saw me, and the expression on his face told me everything before he even spoke. Fear. Real fear. He ended the call slowly. Eleanor. What happened? For a second, he seemed to search for the gentlest possible words. Then, finally, Vanessa filed a police report against you. The world seemed to stop moving. What? She claims you threatened her during the confrontation at the house. I stared at him in disbelief. That's insane. There's more. Of course there was. He rubbed his forehead tiredly. She's also requesting a temporary protective order. My chest tightened painfully. A protective order? I almost laughed from shock. Against me? Harrison nodded grimly. She's claiming emotional harassment and intimidation. I could barely process the words. Harassment. Intimidation. I thought about all the nights I stayed awake sewing Daniel's school uniforms by hand because we couldn't afford new ones. I thought about working 16-hour shifts while Vanessa was still learning multiplication tables somewhere. And now this woman was painting me as dangerous. A trembling breath escaped my chest. He hasn't signed anything. That mattered more to me than I wanted to admit. Because despite everything, my son had not joined her lie. Still, the damage was already happening. What about Daniel? Harrison hesitated. By noon, things got worse, much worse. Richard Bennett called personally. Eleanor, he said carefully, you need to prepare yourself. For what? Vanessa spoke to the media. I froze. What media? A local online publication. He sounded disgusted. She's portraying herself as a young mother being psychologically abused by her elderly mother-in-law after a property dispute. I sat down slowly on the edge of the sofa. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm, too loud. She gave interviews? Yes. I closed my eyes. And just like that, the humiliation became public. By evening, the story had spread online. The headlines were vicious. Elderly woman attempts to evict son's family from home. Grandmother threatens mother of two during family breakdown. Property war tears family apart. Not one article mentioned the truth. Not one. No mention of Daniel throwing me out. No mention of the forged paperwork. No mention of Vanessa's affair. Only tears. Manipulation. Half-truths. The internet devoured it instantly. People always love stories where older women become villains, especially when the younger woman cries on camera. Harrison shut off the television after the third report aired. This is temporary, he said firmly. We'll destroy her credibility in court. But I barely heard him, because something deeper was happening inside me. For the first time since leaving the house, I felt ashamed. Not because I had done something wrong, but because public humiliation has a way of infecting even innocent people. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining strangers reading those stories, judging me, believing in her. At 70 years old, after surviving widowhood, poverty, grief, and sacrifice, I was suddenly being portrayed as some bitter old woman attacking a young family. The next morning, things became even worse. My phone rang endlessly. Old church friends, former coworkers, neighbors. Some called to support me. Others called pretending to sheer my side, which really meant they already believed hers. One woman actually asked, "Eleanor, did you really threaten her?" I hung up immediately. Around noon, there was another knock at the penthouse door. This time it was Daniel. The moment I saw him, my heart nearly broke. He looked terrible, unshaven, exhausted, completely shattered. He stepped inside slowly. "Harrison." Then his eyes found me. "Mom." I said nothing. For several seconds, he simply stood there staring at me with overwhelming guilt written all over his face. Then quietly, "She's lying." The words came out broken. I folded my arms tightly. "Then why is she doing this?" He looked down. "Because she's scared." "Of what?" He laughed bitterly. "Prison." The room went silent. Daniel sat heavily in the chair across from me. "I confronted her after your call." His voice shook. "She admitted everything." I stared at him. "The affair?" He nodded. "The money, too." Pain flashed across his face. "She said she only stayed because she thought we'd get the house eventually." Even after everything. That sentence hurt. Not because of Vanessa, because my son heard those words from the woman he loved, and still looked like he wanted to die from losing her. Trauma is strange like that. People mourn even the ones who destroy them. Daniel rubbed his face weakly. "She emptied the joint accounts yesterday." Harrison frowned immediately. "How much?" "Almost everything." I closed my eyes slowly. Of course she did. She also took the kids to her sister's house. My heart clenched. "What about Emma and Luke?" His voice cracked instantly. "She's telling them you hate their mother." The pain in his eyes became unbearable to watch. I suddenly remembered Emma at age 6, sleeping beside me after nightmares. Luke helps me bake cookies every Christmas. Those children loved me, and now Vanessa was poisoning them too. Daniel looked at me desperately. "Mom, I don't know how to stop this." There it was again, that helplessness, that brokenness. And for the first time, I truly saw it. My son had not become cruel overnight. He had become weak slowly, year after year of manipulation, control, humiliation. Vanessa had hollowed him out piece by piece until almost nothing confident remained. But weakness still causes damage, and mine had nearly destroyed me. Harrison suddenly spoke coldly. "She made one major mistake." Daniel looked up. "What?" "She went public." Richard arrived an hour later carrying another thick file. Unlike before, this time he looked almost pleased. "What happened?" I asked. He sat down carefully. "Manessa exaggerated too much." He opened the folder. "And now we can prove it." Inside were screenshots, financial records, witness statements, and surveillance timestamps. Richard adjusted his glasses. "She claimed you harassed her repeatedly at the house." He slid forward security records. "But you only visited once." Another paper. "She claimed fear for her safety." Another page. "Yet she continued trying to access the property after filing the complaint." Then came the final blow. Richard placed several enlarged photographs on the table. Vanessa. Laughing, shopping, having lunch with friends. Less than 2 hours after her crying television interview. No fear, no distress, no trauma, just performance. Daniel buried his face in his hands. Oh my God. Richard looked directly at me. You can destroy her credibility completely. But strangely, I no longer felt triumphant, only tired, deeply tired, because somewhere along the way, this stopped feeling like justice and started feeling like watching a family collapse in slow motion. Daniel suddenly looked at me with tears filling his eyes. I'm sorry, Mom. I stayed quiet. I should have protected you. That sentence nearly shattered me, because all mothers secretly hope their children will one day understand the pain they caused. And when it finally happens, it doesn't feel victorious. It feels tragic. Tears slid silently down Daniel's face. I let her turn me against you. I looked at him carefully. No, I said softly. You chose that yourself. The truth hurt him visibly, but it needed to. Because healing only begins after honesty. Richard closed the folder calmly. The court hearing is in 4 days. He looked toward me. And once this evidence comes out publicly, Vanessa's entire story collapses. I nodded slowly. But deep down, something told me Vanessa still had one final move left. And dangerous people are always most unpredictable when cornered, especially people who believe losing means destruction. I just didn't realize yet how far she was willing to go. The courthouse was overflowing the morning of the hearing. Reporters crowded the entrance. Cameras flashed constantly. People whispered as I walked past. I never imagined that at 70 years old, I would become the center of some public family scandal. Harrison stayed beside me the entire time, one protective hand lightly pressed against my back. Breathe, he whispered gently. But breathing was difficult, because this wasn't just about Vanessa anymore. This was about my grandchildren, my son, my name. And once something becomes public, people stop seeing human beings. They only see entertainment. Richard Bennett walked ahead carrying 3 massive folders. Unlike the last hearing, this time he looked confident, almost dangerous. That woman made a fatal mistake, he muttered quietly. She lied under oath. Inside the courtroom, Vanessa was already seated beside her attorney. The moment I saw her, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the soft crying victim from television interviews. Today she looked furious, sharp, cold, cornered, and dangerous people become reckless when they realize control is slipping away. Daniel sat 2 seats away from her. He looked emotionally destroyed, thinner than ever, dark circles beneath his eyes, hands trembling slightly. But something else was different too. For the first time in years, he wasn't sitting beside his wife. That mattered. The judge entered precisely at 9 a.m. Everyone stood. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Miriam Ellis adjusted her glasses and began reviewing the case immediately. Her expression grew colder with every page. Finally, she looked directly at Vanessa. You understand you are under oath today? Yes, Your Honor. Richard stood slowly, and then the destruction began. Mrs. Carter, he said calmly, you stated in your affidavit that Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore repeatedly harassed and threatened you at your residence. Vanessa nodded dramatically. Yes. You also stated you feared for your safety. Yes. Richard smiled slightly, the kind of smile lawyers wear before they bury someone. Interesting. He pressed a button on the remote in his hand. The courtroom projector lit up instantly. Security logs appeared on screen. Dates, times, building footage. Richard walked slowly toward the screen. These are verified records from the property security system. He pointed carefully. According to this evidence, Mrs. Whitmore visited the residence exactly once in 34 days. Vanessa's face twitched. Richard continued calmly. And during that visit, she remained inside for precisely 11 minutes. The judge looked toward Vanessa immediately. Is that accurate? Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. I don't know. Richard clicked again. Now surveillance images filled the screen. Vanessa leaving expensive restaurants, shopping downtown, laughing with friends. All taken immediately after her emotional television interviews. This was less than 2 hours after she claimed severe emotional distress, Richard explained. The courtroom murmured loudly. Vanessa's attorney stood quickly. Objection. Relevance. Overruled, Judge Ellis replied instantly. Richard nodded gratefully. Then he delivered the real blow. He changed the slide again, and suddenly, the entire room went silent. Bank records, transfers, account numbers. Large red circles around transactions. Richard's voice became sharper now. Mrs. Carter, can you explain why more than $312,000 were transferred from your husband's business accounts into accounts connected to one Ethan Cole? Daniel physically flinched hearing the name. Vanessa went pale instantly. I don't know what that is. Richard raised an eyebrow. You don't? Another click. Photographs appeared. Vanessa kissing Ethan outside a hotel. Vanessa enters a luxury apartment building with him. Vanessa boards a flight with him. Gasps filled the courtroom. Daniel lowered his head completely. I could actually see his shoulders shaking. Rickard turned toward the judge. We have additional evidence showing Nifshase and Carter used stolen marital funds to purchase property jointly with Mr. Cole. Vanessa suddenly exploded. This is ridiculous. Her composure shattered instantly. That old woman is obsessed with ruining my life. Judge Ellis slammed her gavel hard. Control yourself. Vanessa stood abruptly anyway. She manipulated everyone. She pointed directly at me. She turned Daniel against me because she couldn't stand losing control of her son. I stayed perfectly calm. That made her even angrier. Richard spoke carefully. Mrs. Carter, are you denying the affair? Silence. Are you denying the transfers? More silence. Then finally, I was unhappy. The room erupted into whispers. Daniel closed his eyes slowly, and in that moment, I watched 20 years of illusion finally die inside my son. Vanessa realized it too. Panic flashed across her face instantly. Daniel, she said desperately, don't listen to this. But he still wouldn't look at her, not once. Richard continued mercilessly. There's another issue before the court. He opened a second folder. Child welfare. My heart tightened immediately. Photos appeared on screen. Lucas sitting alone outside school. Emma crying in a playground. Records of missed pickups, missed school days, teacher complaints. The courtroom atmosphere changed completely. This was no longer about family drama. Now it was about the children. The court-appointed child therapist stood and spoke calmly. Both minors show signs of emotional instability caused by severe household conflict. She adjusted her notes carefully. The daughter has developed anxiety symptoms
and the son demonstrates signs of emotional withdrawal. Judge Ellis looked furious now.
Vanessa began crying immediately. But they were different tears now, not manipulative, desperate,
Because she realized the performance was ending.
Richard delivered the final strike. We believe Mrs. Carter knowingly weaponized false allegations in an attempt to gain leverage during an ongoing financial investigation. Judge Ellis leaned back slowly, then finally looked toward Vanessa. Did you knowingly file false statements before this court? Vanessa's attorney immediately stood. My client invokes her right not to answer pending criminal review. That answer said everything. The judge removed her glasses slowly, and for several seconds the courtroom was completely silent. Then came the ruling. The temporary protective order is dismissed effective immediately. Relief crashed through me so suddenly I nearly cried, but the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued coldly, this court is referring evidence of financial misconduct, false reporting, and possible fraud to the district attorney's office for review. Vanessa looked like she might faint. Daniel finally lifted his head, and for the first time in months, he looked directly at his wife with complete clarity, no fear, no confusion, no denial, only devastation. Vanessa reached for him desperately. Daniel, please. He moved his hand away slowly. That tiny movement somehow felt bigger than everything else. Because toxic control only survives while the victim keeps reaching back. And for the first time, my son finally stopped. The hearing ended minutes later. Reporters exploded outside the courtroom instantly. Questions flew everywhere. Mrs. Whitmore, do you feel vindicated? Will criminal charges be filed? Did your daughter-in-law steal from the family? Richard blocked most of them. Harrison shielded me carefully toward the car. But before we reached it, Daniel called out behind me, Mom. I turned slowly. He stood alone on the courthouse steps. Vanessa was nowhere nearby. And suddenly, he looked like the little boy I used to walk home from school. Lost, ashamed, terrified. He stepped closer carefully. I signed the divorce papers this morning. I stared at him silently. Tears filled his eyes instantly. I should have listened to you years ago. The pain in his voice was unbearable. But pain alone doesn't erase damage. I know, I answered softly. He nodded slowly, like he deserved that answer. Because he did. Then quietly, do you think the kids will ever forgive me? That question shattered something inside me. Because no matter how old our children become, part of us still aches when they hurt. I touched his face gently. One day, I whispered. But first, you need to become someone they can trust again. He broke down completely after that. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silent tears from a broken man who finally understood how much he had lost. Harrison opened the car door for me quietly. Before getting inside, I looked back one last time. Daniel stood alone on those courthouse steps while reporters circled in the distance. And for the first time since all this began, I no longer felt anger toward him, only sadness. Because sometimes the hardest part of motherhood is watching your child survive the consequences of becoming someone you barely recognize. 3 months passed after the courthouse hearing. 3 quiet months. No reporters, no screaming phone calls, no courtroom battles, just silence. And after years of chaos, silence felt almost unfamiliar. Every morning, I sat on the balcony with my coffee while Manhattan slowly woke beneath me. Winter had started settling over the city. The trees below had turned gold and amber. Steam rose from street vents. Taxi horns echoed through the cold air. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving. I was living. Harrison walked into the kitchen one morning carrying the newspaper beneath his arm. "There's something you should see," he said gently. I looked up from my tea. His expression told me immediately this wasn't casual conversation. He sat beside me slowly and placed the paper on the table. Business section. A small headline near the bottom caught my eye. Carter Home Goods files for restructuring. My chest tightened instantly. Daniel's company, or what remained of it. I read the article carefully. Failed expansion, debt accumulation, investor withdrawal. The company was collapsing publicly now. I set the paper down slowly. "He tried," Harrison said quietly. "I'll give him that." I nodded silently, because he had. After signing the divorce papers, Daniel had thrown himself into rebuilding what little remained of his life. Therapy twice a week, shared custody arrangements, parenting classes, financial repayment plans. For the first time in years, he was trying to become an adult instead of someone hiding behind other people's decisions. The consequences don't disappear simply because someone changes. Sometimes growth begins only after everything falls apart. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Maria, Harrison's housekeeper, entered quietly. "Mrs. Whitmore," she smiled warmly. "Your grandson is here." Instantly, my entire face softened. Luke burst through the doorway seconds later, wearing a puffy winter coat and carrying a school backpack almost bigger than himself. "Grandma," I laughed as he nearly tackled me into the chair. Emma followed behind him more carefully, holding a drawing folder against her chest. And behind them stood Daniel. He looked healthier now. Still tired, still humbled, but different. There was honesty in his eyes again. "Morning, Mom," he said softly. "Good morning, sweetheart." The children immediately ran toward the kitchen demanding pancakes. Harrison groaned dramatically from across the room. "Oh no, not pancake day again." Emma giggled. "You burn them every time." "I do not burn them," Harrison protested. "I caramelize them." The apartment was filled with laughter, real laughter, not forced, not tense, the kind that heals rooms slowly. While the children argued about chocolate chips, Daniel stepped quietly onto the balcony beside me. Snow had started falling lightly outside, tiny flakes drifting across the skyline. He stared out silently for a moment before speaking. "I sold the house." My heart stopped. Slowly, I turned toward him. "The house?" I repeated quietly. He nodded once, the big one. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. That house held 37 years of my life. Albert planting roses in the backyard, Christmas mornings, birthday parties, family dinners, the staircase where I taught Daniel to walk, and also betrayal, humiliation, loneliness. Daniel swallowed hard. "I know what it meant to you." I looked down at my hands. What happened? The taxes were too high after the company collapsed. He sighed heavily. And honestly, I couldn't stay there anymore. I understood immediately. Some houses stop feeling like homes after enough pain happens inside them. "Who bought it?" I asked quietly. Daniel hesitated strangely. Then finally, "You did." I blinked in confusion. What?
A small smile appeared on his face for the first time.
Harrison bought it through one of his firms 2 months ago. He looked almost embarrassed. He transferred the deed to you yesterday. I stared at him in complete shock. Slowly, I turned toward the kitchen where Harrison stood, pretending not to listen while flipping pancakes badly. You bought my house? Harrison shrugged casually without turning around. It already belonged to you emotionally. He flipped another pancake. I simply fixed the paperwork. Tears instantly filled my eyes, not because of the house itself, but because after years of being discarded, someone finally believed I deserved to keep what was mine. Daniel reached into his coat pocket carefully, then handed me a small silver key, my old house key. I stared at it silently. You can sell it, he said softly. Rent it. Leave it empty. Whatever you want. His voice cracked slightly. But it should have always stayed yours. I closed my hand around the keys slowly, and suddenly memories flooded through me all at once. Sewing wedding dresses late into the night, counting every dollar carefully, saving for years beside Albert. Every wall in that house carried pieces of our sacrifice. And yet somehow, I had allowed myself to believe I no longer deserved it. That realization hurt more than anything else. That afternoon, Harrison drove me there. The neighborhood looked exactly the same. Children riding bicycles, Christmas decorations hanging from porches, the same oak tree near the mailbox. But when we stopped in front of the house, I froze. Because suddenly I wasn't 70 anymore. I was 29 again, holding Daniel as a baby, watching Albert paint the shutters, dreaming about our future. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Funny how pain can enlarge things in memory. Harrison lopped beside me quietly as I approached the front door. My hands trembled while inserting the key, not from fear, from emotion. The lock clicked open instantly. I stepped inside slowly, and the silence nearly broke me. Empty rooms echoed softly. The furniture was gone. The walls are bare. But the sunlight still entered the same way through the front windows. Golden, warm, familiar. I walked through each room carefully. The dining room where we celebrated anniversaries. The kitchen where I baked birthday cakes. The hallway where little fingerprints once covered the walls. Then finally, I climbed the stairs. My breathing slowed as I approached the small back bedroom, the room Vanessa had turned into my prison. I opened the door gently, empty, cold, quiet. I stood there for a long moment, then finally whispered, "No more." And somehow, the room no longer scared me, because pain loses power once you survive it. Harrison appeared quietly behind me. You okay? I nodded slowly. Then I surprised myself. I want to rebuild it. He smiled softly. The house? No, I answered gently. Myself. That evening, we sat together in the empty living room on folding chairs while snow fell outside the windows. No fancy furniture, no luxury, no noise, just peace. Harrison handed me a cup of tea. What are you thinking about? He asked. I looked around slowly, then smiled. For years, I thought losing this house meant losing my life. I touched the old wooden armrest beside me. But now I realize something. What? A home was never these walls. I looked toward him warmly. It was the people who made me feel safe inside them. His eyes softened instantly, and for the first time since Albert died, I finally understood something important. Love after grief doesn't replace what was lost. It simply teaches your heart that life is still capable of giving. Recognize. 1 year later. Funny how life can completely collapse and still somehow rebuild itself into something beautiful. This morning, sunlight pours through the kitchen windows while cinnamon and coffee fill the air. I stand beside the counter rolling dough while Emma carefully sprinkles flour everywhere except the bowl. Grandma, she giggles. I think the flour exploded. Luke laughs from across the kitchen table. No, you exploded it. The house echoes with warmth. Real warmth. Not the kind created by expensive furniture or large rooms. The kind built slowly by peace. Outside, spring has returned to New York. The roses near the front porch have started blooming again. Harrison planted them 6 months ago. Pink ones. My favorite. I never told him that. Somehow he already knew. All right, Harrison announces dramatically while entering the kitchen wearing an apron that says, King of Pancakes. Who's ready for my famous breakfast? Luke groans loudly. You burned the bacon last time. I improved the flavor, Harrison argues proudly. Emma bursts into laughter. Watching them together still amazes me sometimes. Because after everything we survived, joy feels almost sacred. I carry the tray toward the dining room while the children chase each other through the hallway. The same hallway where silence once suffocated me. Now it sounds alive again. That's the strange thing about healing. It doesn't erase pain. It simply gives life permission to grow around it. The front door opens softly around noon. Daniel walks inside carrying grocery bags. Morning, everyone. His voice sounds lighter these days. Not perfect, not completely healed, but honestly. Therapy changed him. Not overnight, not magically. Real change never happens that way. It came slowly, painfully, like someone rebuilding a collapsed bridge stone by stone. He hugs the children first, then me. Still, every time my son hugs me now, I feel gratitude. Because there was a moment I truly believed I had lost him forever. Dad, Luke says excitedly, Grandma's teaching us how to make homemade bread. Daniel smiles. Good, because your grandmother saved this family with bread and stubbornness. I laugh softly. That's not true. Harrison raises an eyebrow. The stubbornness part definitely is. The room fills with laughter again. Simple moments. But after surviving betrayal, simple moments become priceless. Later that afternoon, while the children play in the backyard, Daniel and I sit together on the porch. The breeze moves gently through the trees. For a while, neither of us speaks. Then finally, he says quietly, I drove past the old office yesterday. I glanced toward him carefully. The company building had officially closed 6 months ago, sold to another corporation. Everything Daniel built there disappeared. I thought I'd feel angry, he admits, but honestly, I just felt relieved. I nod slowly. Sometimes losing the wrong life makes room for the right one. He looks down at his hands. I wasted so many years trying to keep peace with someone who was destroying me. His voice cracks slightly. And I almost lost you because of it. I place my hand gently over his. You did lose me for a while. He closes his eyes painfully. But I continue softly. You found your way back.
For several seconds, he says nothing. Then, quietly,
I still don't understand why you forgave me. That question sits heavily between us. Because the truth is, forgiveness is complicated. I stare out toward the garden before answering. I didn't forgive you because what you did was acceptable. I pause carefully. I forgave you because carrying hatred was destroying me too.
a tear slips down his cheek instantly. I'm sorry, Mom.
This time, those words feel different. Not desperate, not manipulative, real. I squeeze his hand gently. I know. Inside the house, Emma suddenly screams. Grandma, Harrison burned something again. Smoke immediately drifts from the kitchen. Daniel bursts into laughter. Real laughter. The kind I hadn't heard from him in years. We rush inside together. Harrison stands near the stove, fanning smoke with a towel, while Luke collapses laughing onto the floor. It was one pancake. Harrison protests. One. You cremated it, Emma says dramatically. The entire kitchen erupts into chaos. And standing there in the middle of all that noise, I suddenly realize something. This. This is what home was supposed to feel like all along. Not fear, not tension, not silence. Love, safety, warmth. Later that evening, after Daniel takes the children home, Harrison and I sit together on the back porch swing. The sky glows orange and gold above the city. Birds chirp softly somewhere nearby. He takes my hand gently. You're quiet tonight. I lean my head against his shoulder. I was just thinking. About what? How strange life is. He smiles softly. That's a dangerous sentence coming from you. I laugh quietly. Then I look out toward the garden again. A year ago, I thought my life was over. I swallow carefully. I thought being thrown out by my own son meant I had lost everything. Harrison listened silently. But losing that house, I continued softly, forced me to finally see my own worth. The evening breeze moves through the roses gently. I spent years accepting crumbs because I was afraid of being alone. I shake my head slowly. And the moment I stopped begging people to love me properly, everything changed. Harrison kisses my forehead gently. They didn't break you, Eleanor. No, I whisper. I smile softly while watching the sunset fade beyond the trees. They reminded me who I was. For a long moment, neither of us speaks. Then Harrison asks quietly, And who are you now? I think about that carefully. About the frightened woman who once cried alone in a tiny bedroom. About the mother who tolerated humiliation just to remain close to her family. About the woman who finally stood up and demanded dignity. Then finally, I smile. I'm someone who survived. The porch swing creaks softly beneath us. Warm lights glow through the house windows behind us. And for the first time in many years, my heart feels completely at peace. Because life taught me something important through all the pain, betrayal, heartbreak, and rebuilding. A person can lose almost everything: money, family, marriage, home, certainty. But if they still have their self-respect, they can rebuild, stronger, wiser, unbreakable. People often think strength means never falling apart, but they're wrong. Real strength is rebuilding yourself after life shatters you. And love, real love, isn't the love that controls you, uses you, or makes you smaller. Real love protects your peace. It helps you heal. And sometimes, after the darkest chapter of your life,
Love quietly returns when you least expect it, not to rescue you, but to walk beside the stronger person you became after surviving the fire. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to subscribe and join our family here on the channel. Every week, we share emotional stories about family, betrayal, resilience, second chances, and the strength it takes to rebuild your life after heartbreak. And now I want to hear from you. Do you believe family should always be forgiven? Or are there moments when walking away is the only way to heal? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your story might help someone else feel less alone today. And if you stayed with me until the end, thank you truly. Remember this: no matter how broken life may leave you, your worth never disappears. Sometimes the people who try to push us out of our own lives are the very ones who force us to rediscover our strength. So never beg for love, never shrink yourself to keep peace, and never forget, diamonds are created under pressure. See you in the next story.